One of the most fascinating things we discovered is how many myths, untruths, lies, whatever you want to call them, how many there are when we start talking about weight loss. I want to share with you these myths, and as you listen, let's be careful, because sometimes I will say it as the myth, and I want to make sure you don't think that's the true part. I'll try to make sure we identify exactly what the truth is, so let's get right to the point. Now, I can tell you we have recently reordered these because we've taken a look at all of the data. And so here was the one that came out first because we hear it so often. A person looks at us and says, well, you know, I can always go on a diet. I guess I'll just go on a diet. If I gain a little weight this season, I'll just start on a diet. Well, the question is, does it work? I mean, you hear that all the time, right? And quite frankly, it's probably accurate to say, for most of us any longer, diets don't work. If diets worked, we'd all be thinner. I went to a bookstore the other day. Absolutely unbelievable. I think I've read close to 100 books on weight loss, going back at least 10 years. But you know what? The other day in the bookstore, mostly new books, 87 different types of diets. Probably all effective, probably all have good basis, and I'm not going to knock any of them because, quite frankly, if you say, well, I like the South Beach diet, or I like Protein Power, or I like Sugar Busters, or the 3-hour diet, there's good things in all of them. Some people say, well, you know, maybe we should eat like the French, drink more wine and more butter. Well, you know what? Dieting isn't the answer. It's a myth. So let's just move on. The number one myth is, I'll go on a diet. Probably, very likely, not going to work. Number two, this one throws people. Myth number two is that, well, I'll just start skipping some meals and then I'll lose some weight. Boy, is that a myth. You know what? Let's do a picture real quickly. A sumo wrestler. Can you picture a sumo wrestler? If you study their particular training program, you will find out why they are the size that they are. They get them up in the morning, give them nothing to eat, make them train most of the day, and then they sit down at a table filled with food. And they gain weight. And so here we are. Well, I'm going to skip breakfast. I'm going to skip a couple of meals. And we wonder why we gain weight. Skipping meals makes us fatter. And yet so many people believe the myth that they can starve some pounds off. We're not going to talk about metabolism and all of that right now, but trust us, skipping meals does not help you lose weight. Number three, maybe the trickiest, maybe one worth spending a minute on, because the myth is this. Well, you know, those fat people, if they just ate less and exercised more, they wouldn't weigh so much. You ever heard anybody talk like that? And if that were true, we'd be thin, wouldn't we? It sounds so sensible. And you know what? Of course, we're not saying that that is totally untrue, but it's a myth. We have to be careful what we eat. We have to get some exercise, of course. But let's go right to the American Medical Association, directly to the New England Journal of Medicine. William Ira Bennett, a doctor, says it this way. Overweight people would like to reduce their weight, or they would benefit considerably if they were able to do so. That seems fairly sensible. He says, but they will not be helped by relentless moralizing and easy solutions that reflect a theory of gluttony that doesn't stand up to available evidence. What he's saying is, folks, it's not that simple. It really is not just that simple. If it were, we would be more successful. This is the one that we heard a lot a few years ago, not quite as much today because some of the popular beliefs are changing, but here's the myth. Eating fat is what makes us fat. That's the myth. Some people think, well, I just have to cut down on my fat. And you know what? That is not even close to the truth. Let's reverse it for a moment. Well, if we eat low fat or no fat or cut back on fat, then we'll lose weight. Trust me, between the mid-'70s and the mid-'90s, that was the belief, that's what was taught, and people gained weight. In fact, one of the great nutritionists said we became fat phobic. We read the fat grams on the box of everything that we bought. We literally became fearful of fat, and guess what? It is a myth. In fact, there's a popular book out today called Eat Fat, Lose Weight. Yes, there are some fats that are bad for us. There are fats that are unhealthy, but quite frankly, we need fat. We need the good fats. So the myth eating fat makes us fat, forget it. It is a myth, and we will expose that myth. Here's another one. Here's another one that's changing because number 5, well, I'm just going to go on a low-carb diet. You know what? I think that one's going away faster than the fat myth. There are people that are calling today the post-Atkins era. Think of the stores that started up in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and now they're closed. And we're not saying low-carb is bad. We're just saying that's not the answer to permanent weight loss, at least not for most people. Eat low-carb and you'll be thin? Myth. There's all kinds of key points that are not covered there, and I'll just name one, and that's fiber. You can't just cut out carbs. As a matter of fact, that's so goofy because what's a carb? Almost everything we eat is a carbohydrate. So at any rate, it isn't low fat, it isn't low carb. Number 6, this one's fascinating to me because quite frankly, the people who say this know better, so you'd almost have to categorize it as a lie. Listen to it. A calorie is a calorie is a calorie. We just have to cut down calories. Well, sure, some of us may have to reduce calories a little bit, but a calorie is not a calorie is not a calorie. It wouldn't be, well, let's say it this way, it would be if we were a furnace, but we're not a furnace. Come on now. We're not talking about just burning something here. What about metabolism? What about the hormones? What about insulin? What about the food effect on the body? You know, Dr. Barry Sears, author of the Zone books, says food is the most powerful drug we can put in our body. So it's not that simple. We do not want you to take some of these ideas and say, well, if we just eat better and cut back on our calories, it's not that simple. Well, let's finish this. Let's get to number 7. This one is unbelievable. I hear it, I believe every day. Well, it must be okay to eat this food. It's been approved, so it must be okay. You know, there are folks out there that believe that if the FDA or the USDA or some other A out there has put a stamp of approval on a product, that it must be okay. And by the way, we're not criticizing the agencies. They do good work. One quick example. A wonderful product. Soy. Soybeans. Soybean oil. More than 50 years ago, we found that if you inject an extra molecule of hydrogen, you can make that oil hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated. Sometimes it's called modified. And we created something that today is called a trans fat. And what we are trying to do today is get those trans fats out of the diet. In fact, there are books now calling trans fats killer foods. You see, if the government says it's okay to eat it, there may not be all the research behind it. I'm really concerned about another product coming on the market, and we'll cover it in this program. It's known as high fructose corn syrup. The point is, there may be a lot of misinformation out there. And if some of this caught your attention, go back and listen to it again. Ask yourself 2 questions. Is that something I say? Something I hear myself say? And number 2, is it something I believe?